Hello. In topic 2, we explore the teaching methods according to which we build our lessons and which help us vary the structure of our lessons. We look closely at four of them, so-called PPP or Presentation Practice Production Method, TTT, Test Teach Test Method, TBL, Task-Based Learning, and Lexical Approach. They have their own advantages, although some of them are liked more by the teachers. The outcomes of this section are to get a deeper understanding of this method, PPP, TTT, TBL, and lexical approach, to find out the strong points of each method, to examine the application of these methods on the examples from the books, and to come up with a personal example of the lesson plan based on one of the suggested methods. First, we start with PPP, or Presentation Practice Production Method, and its three stages. The presentation stage is very controlled and teacher-oriented. A teacher might use a written text from the textbook, an audio, a video, even a personal story or an anecdote to introduce grammar or vocabulary structures in a context. At this stage, we can also use visual aids, for example, to introduce new vocabulary, especially for lower-level students. The presentation stage is followed by the practice stage, where the introduced material is practiced through different activities like drills, multiple choice exercises, gap and cue exercises, transformations, etc. In this phase, the teacher's role is very important. The teacher directs the activities and provides positive feedback to the students, corrects mistakes, models the correct forms. During the last production stage, the teacher's role is minimized. Students produce dialogues, oral presentations, or sentences based on the material being taught. The teacher observes the students and provides a feedback at the end of the activity. This method has lots of advantages. It is easy to adopt, and it is good for new language teachers. This approach is widely applicable and can be used very flexibly. It is easy to plan a lesson around it, and it has a clear, logical structure both for students and teachers to follow. PPP method has its own lesson frame. You start your lesson with a lead-in. A lead-in differs from a warm-up activity. The aim of a warm-up is to tune the students in, to prepare them for using English at the lesson. The lead-in is directly linked to the topic of the lesson. During the lead-in, your students concentrate on the topic. You try to find out the background knowledge of your students based on the topic of your lesson. After the lead-in comes a presentation stage, where the teacher introduces new vocabulary, grammar structure, models the pronunciation of the new vocabulary. The presentation stage is followed by the language clarification stage, during which the teacher explains, illustrates, or clarifies any language point which might cause difficulties for the students. After it comes the controlled practice stage. Students perform different activities like gap-fill tasks, transformations, ranking vocabulary, answering questions, using new vocabulary, etc. This stage is called controlled, as the language items are limited. Its aim is to practice specific items, how they are used in the context. The teacher should make sure that the students can use introduced items in oral or written productions. The last stage is called the follow-up. The main activities for this stage is discussions or role plays. The students are not controlled by the teacher as in the previous stages. They demonstrate what they have learned during the lesson. This is the last stage of the lesson, but it is the most important one. Its aim is to make sure that the students operate newly learned items while using the language freely. Due to the lack of the time, teachers tend to skip or ignore this stage, but it is of prime importance, and the lesson should be planned in such a way as to leave up to 15 minutes at the end of the lesson for this free practice. This is why a new teacher, while thinking over the lesson plan, should mark the length of every lesson stage and try to stick to it. Let's look at the example of the lesson from the textbook Cutting Edge Pre-Intermediate Level, page 8, which follows the PPP method. The topic of the lesson is games, and the language focus is lexis or vocabulary. First, we start with a lead-in. Exercise 1 is an ideal activity for it as it contains basic questions on the topic. Depending on the level of the students, the teacher might use it to answer all of the questions or some of the questions if the students feel ill at ease while expressing themselves, as the lead-in should last up to 5 minutes. These questions activate the background knowledge of the students on the topic of games. During the presentation stage, we also introduce new vocabulary on the topic games. It can be done with the help of flashcards or definitions if you presume that the names of the games might be unfamiliar for your students. After the presentation, the teacher might ask some comprehension questions to make sure that the students use the words in the right meaning and pronounce them correctly. The questions might be, do you need a ball to play this game? Or do you play alone or as a team? During the last production stage, the students complete a quiz. Answering the questions of the quiz provide the students with the necessary practice of the vocabulary in a context. Teachers' feedback should follow the quiz activity. Let's talk about TTT or Test, Teach, Test method. As the title prompts, it has 3 stages. The first test stage is followed by the teaching stage and is finished with the second test stage. During the first test stage, the teacher gives the students a task to complete but doesn't provide them with any help or assistance. The aim of the stage is to identify the area of difficulties which students experience while dealing with the task individually. During the test stage, the teacher provides students with explanations, clarifications, examples, or practice covering the difficulties revealed during the first stage. The types of activities might vary. This stage is the same as presentation 1 in the PPP method. The teach stage is followed by the second test stage, the aim of which is to consolidate the information acquired during the previous teach stage. Teachers should bear in mind that the activities for the first and the last test stage, although based on the same topic, should be different. This method is less frequently used by the teachers, but it has its own advantages. Let's look at the lesson frame of the TTT lesson. We start with a lead-in. It can be a discussion of the questions related to the topic of the lesson. The aim of the lead-in is to generate students' interest in the topic. Next comes the test stage, with gap-filling activities, matching activities, categorizing activities, in case of teaching vocabulary, etc. The aim of the stage is to identify what students do not know. The first stage should finish with the teacher's feedback. The aim of the stage is to check and clarify the difficulties in grammar, lexis, or pronunciation that students experience. The teach stage presupposes highlighting, clarification, drilling of the language items, of the target language based on the difficulties that the teacher spotted during the first stage. The final stage is a controlled practice. Among the tasks which the teachers should choose could be ranking vocabulary, gap filling, answering questions, sentence transformations. As I previously mentioned, this stage is the same as the presentation stage in the PPP method. The aim of the stage is to provide students with controlled practice at using target language. The end of the lesson is freer practice. It includes such activities as discussions or role plays. These activities enable students to use target language in a less controlled way. TTT or Test, Teach, Test method has a lot of advantages. It helps teachers identify the specific needs of the learners, be it grammar, vocabulary, or pronunciation, and address these needs. TTT can be particularly useful for the students of the intermediate level and for the students who experience some problems with the language. This method can be applied in mixed-level classes as it helps identify objectives for each student. It also works well if a teacher has a new group of students and is unaware as for their level, the material they have been taught, or topics they have been studied. The results of the unassisted testing give the teacher a clear idea what material should be omitted and what material should be retaught rather than covering the whole topic, for example, present continuous from the beginning. Instead, the teacher should concentrate on the areas which cause difficulties and result in students' mistakes. Let's look how TTT method is applied. In the teaching practice on the example of the textbook, cutting-edge pre-intermediate level. As you can see, the lesson focus is grammar. The main aim is to teach students question words and word order in special questions. First, you instruct the students to perform task 1 and 2, namely find question words and order the words in questions. Students should perform the activity without teacher's support. The activities are checked. After checking, the teacher gets an idea of what the students do not know. Then comes the second teach stage, in which the teacher explains, clarifies the points where students have made mistakes or clarifies any areas of difficulties. The final test stage is based on the same topic, but as you can see, the first and the last test stages are completely different. It is essential that the topic of the first and the last test stage should be the same, but the task should be absolutely different. While performing the task, the students are able to apply the rules been previously taught in a new context. Another method which is used by teachers is TBL or task-based learning. As you can see from the title, the lesson is based on performing a task. The meaning of the word task is different from the usual meaning of the word. A task from the textbook is viewed by teachers just as any activity. A task in TBL should have an outcome that students can achieve by the end of the lesson or a series of lessons. Any topic can be used for TBL. The job of the teacher is to choose the tasks which are motivational, engaging for students, and up to their level, although they should present some intellectual and linguistic challenges in order to develop students' language skills. Tasks in TBL must have an outcome. It could be a poster, a video, an itinerary for a trip, or a menu for a birthday party. Let's look at other types of tasks for TBL. They can be: number 1, listing. The students are asked to brainstorm international English words, for example, the names of sports games, or brainstorm the qualities they look for in a product they like, for example, a pen, or name things they could do at a party. Number 2, ordering and sorting activities. For example, reserving a table at a restaurant or making an international phone call. Students might also be asked to rank the items in order of importance according to their interests or usefulness. Or the students might be asked to group the items under the heading agree, disagree, undecided, and stand their point of view or provide an example. Another type of activity is to find as many ways as possible to classify food you eat. Grouping and classifying items belong to the examples of the task for TBL. Number 3 is comparing. While doing this task, students listen to or read the description of different people or places and identify which person or place it is. Students might also be asked to compare 2 reports of the same event from different newspapers or spot the differences between 2 pictures or 2 story endings. Number 4 includes problem-solving tasks. For example, cutting a cake into equal pieces to be given to 8 guests, planning a dinner menu for overseas guests within a limited budget, making up or changing the act of the story, or deciding on the ways for your company to give an aid to a developing country. Number 5, sharing personal experience task, which can be telling an anecdote on a terrible journey you've had, or telling your partner about your earlier school days, or sharing things that make you annoyed, happy, or stressed. Number 6, creating tasks or projects. Among creative tasks might be writing a song, producing a class magazine, or exchanging emails with foreign students. Let's look at the lesson frame of a TBL lesson. First, we start with a lead-in. Its aim is to set the context and generate students' interest in the topic. During the next step, the teacher uses a model text with students for reading or listening to, which is followed by a gist question. During this stage, the students are exposed to the type of text they are going to produce, as well as to the language they are expected to use. Some lexemes should be introduced within the next stage called the language focus. Here, the teachers try to predict and introduce the words which students do not know but might need to use while completing the task. This stage is followed by the task preparation stage, when students plan their own version of the model text. The work is done either individually or in groups or pairs. This stage gives your students a chance to come up with ideas. The teacher's role at this stage is to provide the students with the vocabulary they need to complete the task. Task preparation is followed by the writing or speaking stage, when students prepare what exactly they are going to write or say in the report. After the task is completed, it is performed or reported back. Students rehearse and perform their reports for other students. The aim of the stage is to develop students' fluency while completing a personalized meaning-driving task. After the presentation, the teacher should provide the students with content feedback. The final stage of the TBL lesson is the language focus. Based on the final product, the teacher might choose vocabulary or grammar items which need to be taught. On the screen, you can see some more ideas for the TBL lesson. Making a phone call to make a reservation, or complain about something in a hotel room, writing a formal email in English, visiting the doctor and complaining about health issues, gathering information to make a poster or an advertisement on a given topic, planning a road trip. For example, you try to use TBL method while giving your students the following tasks. Make a video advertising your favorite chocolate bar. Look at a map of Italy and choose the itinerary to go around the country. The aim of your visit is sightseeing. Choose 4 or 5 places to visit and explain why. Lexical approach. The last approach which we are going to examine is called the lexical approach. This term was introduced in 1993 by Michael Lewis, who observed that language consists of grammaticalized lexemes, not lexicalized grammar. In other words, when we talk or write, we do not think about grammar or separate words. We speak using certain phrases or lexical chunks. They are the building blocks of language learning and communication. We do not communicate thinking about grammar functions, but we learn language by memorizing and reproducing chunks and collocations. If we look at this sentence, the principles of lexical approach have been around since Michael Lewis published the lexical approach 10 years ago. It seems, however, that many teachers and researchers do not have a clear idea of what the lexical approach actually looks like in practice. If you look at the bold phrases in brackets, you can see that they are set phrases, or lexical chunks, as we call them. It is very difficult to identify what grammar items we can use here, or what lexemes we should have here, as they are phrases and should be taught as phrases or chunks. Lewis's idea was that when we work with authentic material, it is very difficult to find a text which would give our students a clear idea on only one grammatical structure, for example, present continuous. Usually, in authentic texts, we have a mixture of the vocabulary of different levels, as well as a mixture of grammar items. Let's look at the teacher's role while applying the lexical approach. First of all, we have to listen to our students and, what is more important, hear what they say. We should be ready to notice the gaps in their knowledge as they speak. This is where the lexical chunks come from. Then we have to decide if the student's level and frequency of lexical chunks usage is essential to be taught to the students at this stage, or in other words, if the students are ready for it. We notice lexical chunks, write them down on the board. We try to remember the context to be ready to give students additional explanations. Ideally, we have to prepare and give examples of the same lexical units or lexical chunks to explain to the students, but in a different context. We have to answer students' questions based on the meaning and the usage of the chunks and give necessary explanations. And we have to be ready to practice them further in a different context. Let's look at the example of tasks based on the lexical approach. For example, here we have the verb have in different phrases or lexical chunks. Have a holiday, have an accident, have a chance to, have an idea, had a bit of good luck, had a good time, had no doubt that, had no problem doing something. You suggest your students create a happy end story using all these expressions. Or another type of task is odd one out. By doing this activity, you understand if the students have an idea of how to link the words in a phrase or not. One more example of the task based on the lexical approach method. The task is based on the frantic text called the survivor or circumstances. The strategy of working with an frantic text using the lexical approach is as follows. The teacher examines the frantic text and finds out the phrasal verbs which they are going to discuss with the students. The students might have the task to match phrasal verbs with the definitions, or you give the students the line from the text where the students can find the phrase and give them the task to figure out the meaning of the phrase through the context. So, to apply the lexical approach, the teacher chooses an authentic text, analyzes it, finds lexical chunks for the students to work with, and comes up with a number of tasks to help students master them. It was the last method to be discussed in this section. I hope you find it useful. Now you have the ideas for the methods to choose from while making your lesson plan. Thank you for your attention and good luck.